Arneson, and this is our monthly race class with Jonathan Feingold. And let me remind you, we've been doing this for nearly 3 years. Legislation restricting the teaching of race and racism in public schools and government entities has spread across the country. In an effort to respond, Boston University law professor Jonathan Feingold and myself offer a once-a-month course conversation where listeners can hear what it's like to approach race and racism from a place of curiosity and history rather than fear and anxiety. We're up to race class number 31. I am so impressed, Jonathan Feingold. But before we let you talk or let your guests talk, I do have to sort of say something because this is an interesting month. And I wrote, as we go to tape, it seems appropriate to comment on the fact that the Democratic Party is on the verge of selecting their first woman of color as their presidential nominee for president of the United States. And I was looking at an AP story, Jonathan, and it said Kamala Harris has an American focused on multiracial identity. And I just want to read the first couple of sentences of this just recently published piece at the AP. An election year that was bitterly partisan has been completely upended by President Joe Biden's decision to drop out of the 2024 White House race and endorse Vice President Kamala Harris. But it's not Harris's late entry that has electrified things. It's also the history to be made if the likely Democratic nominee becomes the first female president who is also multiracial. The daughter of a Jamaican father and an Indian mother, both of whom immigrated to the United States during the Civil Rights Movement, Harris's historic presidential bid has again put a spotlight on American identity politics and the growing number of people who say they're multiracial. And I thought what was interesting was that in 2010, the number of individuals that define themselves as multiracial was 9 million people. By 2020, 33.8 million in the US identified as being more than one race. So again, things are changing. It is an exciting time. And Jonathan, I am so happy that you're part of my life and my experience here, especially as we get to introduce our next guest, because episode 31 is something that I think is very important to my audience, but it's also near and dear to me as the daughter of school teachers, having children who've been school teachers, and also understanding the power of public education and the assault on public education. This conversation is incredibly timely. So welcome back to the program. Thank you so much for doing this, Professor Feingold.
Thank you, Arnie. It's always a pleasure to be here. Our time is always limited, and so I'm going to try to do a very quick and concise wind-up so that we can get into our conversation with Dr. James Whitfield, who really we are so honored to have with us. I think sometimes about where my motivation or inspiration comes, and increasingly it's from teachers, like often public school teachers. So my kid, I have a 5-year-old who just finished pre-K this past year, and it's the sort of thing where you can analytically, intellectually understand how important teachers are, especially with young kids, but it's not until you have one in school who is spending their whole day with them that you appreciate it in a deeper, more personal way. And a thread of my research over the past few years has increasingly focused on not just the heroic work teachers do, not just how they fortify communities and democracy, but how they've increasingly come under attack. And in places like Texas, it's been an increasingly hostile, challenging environment. We've witnessed some of just increasing, continually escalating attacks. And so I'm really honored that we get to chat today with an educator from Texas, Dr. James Whitfield, who has experienced quite an ordeal, but is, someone that I hope we can at least a little bit lift up as an American hero. And so I'm going to read a quick bio, and then we're just going to jump into some questions. Dr. James Whitfield is an award-winning education advocate centered on creating safe, nurturing, and equitable learning environments, which in turn help transform communities. Again, it's not just about the kids or the students and the teachers, it is about the community. And over the course of nearly 2 decades in education, he served as a classroom teacher, assistant principal, and principal at the middle and high school levels. He was also the target of a coordinated backlash campaign that cost him a job in which he was clearly beloved by the students he taught. In the summer of 2020, when Dr. Whitfield was early in his tenure as the first Black principal at a predominantly white high school in Texas. And in the heat of global protests for racial justice, he wrote a letter to the school community detailing the pain of anti-Black racism. Almost immediately, backlash ensued, much from outside of the community. Um, and for listeners, I would just like encourage everyone to look up the story and look at the videos of the students who rallied in support of Dr. Whitfield. So we get him here with us today to talk a little bit about his story, more broadly about the challenges facing educators, and maybe reasons for optimism, even in oppressive times. And so, thank you, James, for being with us. It's really great to have you here.
And Dr.
Truly,
Whitfield, just
truly
forgive
honored.
me. I just want to add something. It's not just the students who came out and spoke in favor of you, but I went back to a Washington Post story. Despite pleas to reinstate Whitfield and no member of the public calling for his termination on Monday, no member, let me just celebrate those two words. No member of the public calling for his termination. The school board voted to approve the superintendent's notice of non-renewal. I need to compliment you because it's very rare to see that no member speaking up, but they all were in support of you. So it's not surprising the students who were intimate with your ability to lead and your presence in the school, but it's the families and the public that also saw that as well. So that's an incredible compliment. And again, thank you for joining us. And we'd love to hear your story and your concerns going forward.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. Thank y'all.
and so, in a second, I'll ask a little bit about sort of the specifics of that ordeal. But first, I'm going to start with a question that we ask all of the guests on Race Class, which is, where was your racial education? Was it in school? Was it out of school? Was it formal? Was it informal? And we do mean the question sort of broadly, but when was it? Where was it? How did you learn about this thing called race?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I grew up out in West Texas. So out in Midland, Odessa. If you ever seen Friday Night Lights, that's where I grew up. From kindergarten all the way through high school. And I'm multiracial. So my mom is white. My mom has since passed away, and my dad is Black. And so, growing up, in Midland, Texas, in the segment of Midland, Texas that I grew up in, there were a lot of Hispanic families in the community. There was a lot of Caucasian families in the community. There weren't a lot of kids that looked like me in the community, especially I had this big afro that just my mom would just pick every day just as high as it would go. And so I was the only kid that really looked like me in school. So I knew as I went into school, I knew something was different. I was the only kid that the teacher came around and pat on the head, right? And talked about his hair. I don't know that she did. I don't think she did that intentionally in a mean-spirited way, but I felt something was different. But my mom, my white mom, was the one that taught me more about race. I can remember my earliest moments where this kind of triggered. We were in a grocery store, and for me growing up, we were very, very poor, abject poverty. And when we were going into the aisle to get things for chicken noodle soup, I knew it was a good time. This was going to be good. And my mom had got all these things for chicken noodle soup, and I was probably 5 years old. And so I figured that was my shot to get my favorite candy. I like Reese's peanut butter cups. And so, my mom's at the checkout line. She's getting, putting everything in. I see the Reese's peanut butter cups down the way. And I said, can I go get those? Can I get some Reese's peanut butter cups, Mom? She said, sure, baby, go get them. And so I walk over to go get them, and it's one of the empty registers. And as I'm getting those Reese's peanut butter cups, a lady yells at me, white lady yells at me. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm froze. I don't know what's going on. She goes, who's with this kid? They're always leaving their kids. And, she's just going off. And here comes my white mom over, and she's like, man, what seems to be the problem? She goes, somebody needs to come find their kid. They always leave their kids running around. She didn't say the word, but she was very they. She goes, well, but that's my baby. I got it. We're going to go pay for him right over here. And you can see the look on the lady's face. And my mom held it together. But as we walked out, she was always teaching me lessons about the things that I would face, don't put your hands in your pockets, James, when you go into stores, because people are going to think it's just what it is, and I don't want to have to take that call as your mother, but she was like, people will see you a certain way just based on the country that we live in. I love you. I'm your mom. I'm white. But there are going to be people that automatically assume a certain thing from you. And so it was informal from my mother, my white mother. My dad was a Vietnam veteran. Of course, he experienced things when he came back, but he didn't really like to talk about anything, regarding race. He just kind of just pushed it down with a lot of things. But my mom was the one kind of informally, because I sure wasn't here taught anything in school in Midland, Texas, with regard to race, racism, systemic, racial inequities. It was my mother.
And thank you for sharing that story. And it touches on so many sort of themes and topics that we've engaged in this class. And for me, it also so I have a 5-year-old who is, very light skinned, kid who anyone who saw would just identify as a white kid. I don't think that if he walked up to a register, someone would treat him that way. And maybe I can't prove it in some empirical sense, but if you know how the way just race functions in the United States, it's something that he does not have to face. His parents do not have to confront. And then thinking about all the ways in which through schools we could be, in age appropriate ways,
for sure,
helping students as they grow up understand how race functions. That just makes so much sense when you live in a world in which race structures so much of our daily lives. And yet, as you know, we live in a world where it's increasingly outlawed to have those conversations.
Right. And so, one of the wildest things about it is the kids are really ready to have conversations at varying ages, right? Age appropriateness. But those kids are eager to have those conversations. It's mainly the adults in some of these kids' lives that would rather them not.
Yeah. They are curious and just trying to figure out why the world sometimes seems weird or awkward or different, and they're just trying to navigate it. But yeah, and as you know, all the years that you've spent also just working with students. And so let me then transition or segue into your ordeal. And I'm going to, because we have such limited time, I will just encourage everyone to read about it. But for now, I'm wondering, and Arnie referenced a little bit of it, there's anything that just the average person wouldn't be able to glean from standard media reports that's just really important for everyone to understand, whether it's just from this and whatever you're interested in sharing with us.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many things. Media only has so much time. They're trying to get the best headline and the one that's going to grab the most eyes, so to speak. But in so many times there's gaps in there. And so one of the things that's a huge misconception is that this is primarily about the letter that I sent out in regard to George Floyd's murder. They're like, after he sent this letter, most every article you see, after he sent this letter about the murder of George Floyd, the community was up in arms, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And in reality, in the aftermath of that, right after, there was nothing but positive feedback from the letter. So the people that communicated with me it was all positive. It was, thank you for sending out this letter. We really, really appreciate you. And this was from the white parents, Black parents, Hispanic, from a wide range of families. There was not one single email, one single phone call, one single meeting request to say, hey, why in the world did you send that out in a mean-spirited way? There was none of that. But what I did know was in the background in some of these Facebook groups that it popped up, in particular, one Facebook group that was really people from the outside of the district that were kind of stirring the pot. They were saying things not only about that, but just, anything that I was having to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, having a diversity advisory council at the school. There, in those ways, that's where it was really baking, if you will. So it wasn't, it came out in July of 2021 where the guy referenced that letter. And some would think that, oh, this had been going on since I sent that letter out. That wasn't the case. And I saw that Facebook group taking off in the background over the course of my first year there as principal. And I tried to speak to as many people as I can that I thought would listen in positions of power that had some influence in the community. But most people tended to just say, no, this too shall pass type of thing. And, that is crazy talk, what they're doing in there. It won't stick. That's one of the things that we really missed on. We didn't really get on the offensive. We just kind of played defense and felt like it would just move. But I think that's one thing that most people don't know, and you wouldn't be able to see in the news.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And we've talked a few times before, and I did not. So I had understood the letter really as this sort of
trigger,
igniting factor, and I knew that it was like an outsiders from the community, and that there was like strong community support. But that is, no, it's like helpful for me. And so now, zooming out, and we have limited time left, but so I want to try to get a few more questions. But I'm just wondering if you could share how, like, the attacks that like you faced, just coupled with the broader political climate and hostility towards public education and teachers in Texas, how does it affect all the stakeholders, like students, educators, and communities? And I mean, even your story is one where you had a community that wanted you, right, and then they lost you. And so I'm just wondering, just like the ripple effect, just across the state.
Yeah, it's really hard for educators in Texas. And, I've got some friends in Florida, Tennessee that are facing similar experiences, especially states in, southern states. It's really difficult. How can you as an educator, I can't tell you the number of educators I've spoke to and tried to guide through similar experiences, especially here in Texas, but not confined just to Texas. I mean, California, Oregon, other places as well. But their main thing is like they say we see the support you had, and I'm afraid I won't have that level of support. So how do I speak out against what's happening to me, in my space? And I think of, out in Granbury, Texas, you've had 2 librarians that have been under law enforcement investigation for felonies for 2 years. They've been facing this for 2 years, from law enforcement coming into their libraries and accusing them of things based on things that our politicians have put into law. You've up the street here in Northwest ISD, I had a teacher come to me that, she's in the same thing, facing these Facebook group attacks and people calling her a pedophile and indoctrinator simply because she's trying to create a safe and nurturing space for students to learn and grow. So we talk about the effect on educators, yes, but then you spoke to how it ripples down to the kids. If you've got teachers showing up in a space of fear and anxiety, at some point that's going to transfer. A teacher can't get up there and do their best work if they're just carrying all this weight in with them. And so if I'm constantly having to tiptoe around what I say and what I do and what I know to be best and good for kids, that's going to hurt kids. It's actually malpractice. What we're setting teachers up for. And so it's really difficult. But one of the differences there in Northwest is you had a district leadership that said, we support this teacher. That teacher's still teaching. And the people have kind of backed off. So leadership really matters in these situations. And anybody listening, if you're in a district level administration, if you're a school board, like your support and your willingness to stand up and support these educators, it really goes a long way. It signals to the community that you're not willing to, put up with the foolishness and that you really have your teachers back. It can go a long way.
I'm
Thanks.
looking at the article originally from 2021 in the Washington Post, and you write something, I guess, in the Texas Tribune, and you said this, James. Education is the key to stomping out ignorance, hate, and systemic racism. It's a necessary conduit to get liberty and justice for all.
Yes.
And again, it's a powerful, powerful line, especially at this moment when we're talking about freedom. All of a sudden, the word freedom is being taken back. The term patriotism is being taken back. The word liberty is being taken back. And again, I think your point is so well taken that leadership matters. Not just
Yes.
your leadership as a principal, but the leadership as a superintendent, the leadership on the school board. So people need to vet those people because they will be attacked too. It's not
Right.
just you, it's the superintendent will be attacked. And therefore, they need to sort of create a moat of support from the public around the people that they chose. So not only is it the wise decisions they have to make, but they also have an obligation that they just don't vote, but that they show up and they show their support and they said, this was our choice. They support this principle. Outside agitators, you can agitate, but you don't control our decision making. And I think that that's so important.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
we've only got about 5 minutes left, and so I'm going to squeeze a couple questions together, and then you just pick which direction you want to go. It'll
Yeah.
be a
Yeah. For
choose your
sure.
own adventure sort of thing.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I'm interested in, um, and I've talked with you and others. You referenced Florida and Tennessee, Amy Donofrio, who's been through her own ordeal, but recently prevailed in an attempt by the Sanders
Yes.
administration to strip her license, and Matt Hahn in Tennessee, who has a hearing coming up. I've had this sort of conversation with all of you multiple times, but for listeners, it might be new. And so I'm interested if you could identify like one or two or three concrete things that should be in place right now, because it's now year 4 of these attacks, but aren't, that would help teachers. So that's like, so path A. Or path B is there reason to be optimistic or hopeful right now, even in these incredibly hard times? Or merge it or choose your own question, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's very, very thoughtful. I'll try to merge them both. So, one of the main things that we've seen missing, and Matt and Amy and I, we've met over the course of this time. I'm so grateful for both of them throughout this experience. They've been a huge source of support. But that's been one of the huge gaps, has been the support, whether it be, legal resources, financial resources. We're all up against legal battles. And so, trying to, I've got friends that don't have jobs right now. I'm fortunate I'm employed right now. But man, let me tell you, it was really tough to find a job when people Google your name. And even though I sat with district leaders in this area that said, James, I would love to have you, but it's too hot right now. I'm like, thank you, because I don't want to work for you because you're not willing to be the type of leader that we need in these spaces. But it's very discouraging. So those gaps in resources is the main thing that, you got educators that are under attack. They fear for their livelihoods, and they look around and they're like, where is the help coming from? There's no concerted network of support coming together. Whereas on the other side, the attack side, they've got playbooks, they've got money, they're well funded, right? They've got a concerted effort. So until we can find that counterbalance, and it might not be one organization, but several organizations coming together to have that meaningful support, that's where we'll get to be able to move forward. And then I find hope in, anytime you've got these moments of backlash in our history, it always means that there's progress on the horizon.
Yes.
And so even during this chaos, I'm like, okay, that means we're really digging at something that needs to be rooted out. And people are just getting mad. And we've seen that it's historical. So that means we're on the precipice of something great. And so we just got to keep moving. People that got the Freedom Riders didn't just get on one bus and then just stop and say, hey, this is it. They were beaten, they were spit on, they were cussed out, all those type of things. And they kept getting on that bus. And so we just got to keep getting on the bus, and eventually, it'll come back. It'll come back to bite them, because they've highlighted these issues in a way that, us screaming for all these years hasn't got people's attention. Well, thank you for highlighting these issues. Now let's take it and move them forward. And the beneficiaries will be our kids, our students, our teachers, and our communities.
Thanks, James. We're just about out of time, but I want to throw out one more question. Is there a concrete way that listeners could support you right now?
Yeah, I've got a website, www.drjameswhitfield.com. I've helped a lot of folks along the way, whether it be educators or school boards, district leaders that are trying to navigate not only these issues but other issues that these communities face. And so feel free to reach out to me there. Also, my little brother, he created a GoFundMe account to help support with legal expenses, because those are ongoing. We're still fighting to this day.
Yeah.
Like it's still, it just, yeah.
And I need
to
end this conversation of race class. This is number 31. Jonathan Feingold and I have been doing this for 3 years. Dr. Whitfield, you are an inspiration. Here's the great news. I air on KPFT in Houston, Texas. They hear me all the time. You're in Texas. Guess what, honey bun? You're joining me a lot to talk about this issue of education and inclusiveness, because the kids know. And the more they see the pushback, the more they want to know more. They want to get to the truth. So Jonathan Feingold, thank you so much for doing this race class. And Dr. Whitfield, thank you so much for joining us. This, everyone, is episode 31 of Race Class, a place where we teach about race in a way that is safe, secure, and inspiring. No question. All right, everyone. Ciao. We will talk next month.